Evening, we have a public hearing scheduled to discuss ordinance. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. I'm sorry, public hearing to consider zoning parcel number 020001025344, referred to as the Mardic Investments Incorporated annexation to M2 multifamily high density upon annexation to the city of Findlay via ordinance number 2022-129. This parcel is situated in the city of Findlay, county of Hancock, state of Ohio. It is parcel number, as discussed earlier, 020001025344, and a complete legal description is attached as Exhibit A and is also available in the city council office. Is there anybody who wishes to speak for or against tonight's public hearing? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Wobser, second Mr. Baumann. Any discussion from council? Hearing none. All those in favor of adjournment say aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned. To discuss the rezone of Greendale Avenue, parcel number 21000103996 from R1 residential to O1 offices institutions for the property situated in the city of Findlay, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, in the Fox Run First Edition, east of Part Lot 2, aforementioned to be rezoned from R1 residential to 01 office institutions. Does anyone wish to address council for or against? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Palmer, second Mr. Baumann. Any discussion from council members? Hearing none, all those in favor of adjournment say aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned. City Council meeting, regular session on February 7th, 2023. We will start this evening with the roll call followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence.
Mr. Ballman?
Here.
Ms. Frischi?
Here.
Mr. Greeno?
Here.
Mr. Hellman?
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer? Here. Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Slough? Ms. Warnicki?
Here.
And Mr. Wobser?
Present.
Mr. Slough informed me prior to tonight's meeting that he would not be in attendance. I will entertain a motion to excuse. Mr. Russell, second Mr. Hellman. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor excusing Mr. Slough say aye. Any opposed, nay. He is excused. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, we'll entertain a motion to accept the previous minutes. Mr. Palmer, second Mr. Hellman. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the previous minutes of City Council say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are accepted. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-ons, replacements, or removals from tonight's agenda?
Yes, we have two replacements. Ordinance 2023-009 for Fire Station Number 2 roof replacement, and Ordinance 2023-019, which is approve 2022 ordinances and resolutions. And I would make a move that, or make a motion that those two ordinances be replaced.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of adding those two items to tonight's agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. They are added to tonight's agenda. We have no proclamations. We have no recognition or retirement resolutions. We have no petitions. We have no oral communications, and we have no written communications. We will now move on to reports of municipal officers and departments.
Letter from Director of Law Rasmussen regarding funds for Bricker and Eckler LLP Strict Center invoice and water service extension via ordinance 2023-11.
Questions or comments? Ms. Frischi.
Don, what is the water line extension issue exactly? Where are we extending at, and why are we illegal?
That was the discussion that we were having on the extension of for the authority for the extension.
The
The authority for the
authority?
extension of the water line.
is that 99?
When did 236?
It's 236, I don't know.
236.
For the strict
Yeah.
center?
Not of the Strict Center. I'm talking about the water line extension. That's not for the Strict Center, is it? The water line?
No, it's,
That's what it said.
It's two separate bills.
Jeremy might.
123-11.
Jeremy. Can you answer her question, please, or address it?
Sorry. That was a discussion we had with like regional planning and stuff for when we're going with planning commission, when there's projects outside the city limits, what jurisdiction and what the city can and cannot say within the planning commission. So it was a water line extension. So when the water line extends outside of the city limits, what authorities do we have with the planning commission if it's adjacent to city corp line? So it was a discussion on what the legality is on outside the city limits when it's touching corp limit or not.
And what was the determination since explaining?
That pretty much like when it's outside the city limits, we just are reviewing the sanitary and water. And if we don't like the plan or don't agree with it, then we can deny them water of that. So it was just a clarification on legality of that.
Thank you.
Ms. Mayor.
I would just add that these are the same invoices that we addressed at the end of last year. However, they weren't paid out before the POs were closed at the end of this year. Therefore, we're needing approval again.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Summary financial reports. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Russell.
can we go back to the replacements and add-ons to the
Sure can.
agenda?
Yep.
Just to clarify, I announced ordinance 2023-019 as a replacement, but it is an add-on. So we're replacing 2023-009, and we're adding on to the agenda 2023-019. Sounds confusing. I just wanted to make the clarification that they're not both replacements. One is a replacement, one is an add-on.
Are there any further comments? Thank you, Mr. Russell, for clarifying that.
Summary financial reports as of December 31st, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Treasurer's reconciliation report for December 31st, 2022.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
City Planning Commission minutes for January 12th, 2023, as well as the agenda for February 9th, 2023.
Questions or comments? Minutes and agenda to be filed.
Letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding transmitter and annual maintenance fees.
Questions or comments? Ms. Frischie?
Quick question. We're paying this maintenance fee, but we don't have all the transmitters in. How did the contract read? We're just paying for the full contract amount, even though we only have part of our transmitters in?
The way the contract read was on an anniversary of the date of signing, so.
So
when
whether we have it installed or not, we're paying for it?
Yes, the maintenance fees, yes.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding ODOT fiscal year 23 resurfacing Bright Road Phase 3, project number 328222000.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from Income Tax Administrator Price regarding request to enter into contract with Innovated Software Solutions Incorporated.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding an appointment to the Shade Tree Commission. This appointment does not require council's confirmation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
I'm sorry, City Income Tax Monthly Collections Report.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding the appointment to the Board of Zoning Appeals. This does require council's confirmation.
Mr. Russell.
Move to approve Phil Rooney for the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the appointment of Mr. Rooney, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. He is appointed.
A letter from Fire Chief Eberly regarding fiscal year 21 AFG award notification.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Apologize, I lost my place here. A letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding to enter into an agreement with, is it Gemstick LLC?
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Income Tax Board Minutes for November 2nd, 2022, as well as January 26th, 2023.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
A letter from Fire Chief Eberly regarding fiscal year 22 AFG for purchase of SCBA compressor and fill station.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Kalb regarding ODOT Municipal Bridge Program.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on January 23rd, 2023 to review all current strategic plan categories and sub-bullets. We recommend to continue working to completion of the strategic plan.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve the committee report.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the committee report being accepted, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. It is accepted.
The Appropriations Committee, to whom was referred a request to discuss the Downtown North River Development Project. We recommend that the administration bring back to the Appropriations Committee the following items for committee to consider. A signed draft agreement from the county for the conveyance of all properties involved in the riverfront development area, and a financial plan that outlines potential funding for the project.
Mr. Wobser?
Make a motion to approve the committee report?
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? Mr. Stashek?
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Briefly, two committee reports, in my opinion, don't fully reflect the extent of the discussions that were contained, but this is the one I'd like to address tonight because it goes directly to my role as your fiscal officer. And that is, I believe the community should be aware that at this meeting, the administration requested $1.3 million for 30% of the design for a $10 to $40 million River Park project and pedestrian bridge with up to a $4 million in design costs. I asked at that meeting, how can we afford at this time, without a significant commitment of funds that I have not been made aware of? We don't have 40 million, and we shouldn't spend 1.3 million unless moving forward, was my position at that meeting. What will be the impact on the overall capital improvement needs of this city if we move forward with this project? And why is it being considered before completion of the strategic planning process, was another point that I made at this meeting. I stated also at the meeting that Findlay City Council must approach spending of funds with a business approach, and council needs to follow proper business practices when considering capital improvements, particularly of this magnitude, and including identifying the need beyond what we desire or want for the project, prioritizing the request against all other capital items, develop a comprehensive financial plan for the entire capital plan, not one project at a time, analyze the financial impact of the project on the entire community, and integrate ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations into this. In my opinion, none of these components for proper consideration were shared at the Appropriations Committee meeting, hence the recommendations that I made and the additions that I'm sharing here tonight that weren't included in the committee report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Wobser?
Mr. Auditor, do I understand by your comments that you're in favor of the city implementing ESG scores for this type of project?
I am sharing with the committee the best practices that are recommended for this type of business analysis on all capital planning. So that's a newer thing that's been added by Government Finance Association. And I think it would behoove this body to begin to create actually a more formal, a more informed, and a more thorough process in evaluating its capital, particularly in the environment we're in, and the multi-millions of dollars of projects that are being proposed and continue to be proposed, especially with regard to the fact that we're in the middle of a strategic planning process.
So you are or are not specifically advocating for ESG scoring on these types of projects for the city?
I'm advocating that you folks adopt a process, and it would be up to you whether you adopt that or not. For me, I'm telling you what best practices are, and it's up to you whether you want to follow them or not. But we certainly, with regard to this project and our capital plan for 2023, are not in the process of following best practices on evaluating capital needs.
Ms. Frischie?
Jeff, what's an ESG? I was asking Jeff. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jim.
No,
Environmental,
social, and governance considerations in a project. It's with best practices, it's a more modern, more current way of considering aspects of a project. It's not a decision that you should base an entire decision on, but it's a consideration people are doing. What's the impact in those areas? ESG, environmental,
So that
social,
goes
and
back
governance.
to the financial side because that
It's part of the
dictates
best practice. It's part of the best practices for evaluating capital projects.
Mr. Russell?
Jim, would you distribute this best practice document or documents that for capital project evaluation that you were referring to?
yeah, I'd be happy to, and you can certainly refer to them via the GFOA Government Finance Officer sites, as well as I have in my office a book that I use very regularly with regard to analyzing and evaluating capital projects and considerations. The book's not, as a matter of fact, I'd be happy through my budget to buy copies of this for council members who are interested, because it gives a wonderful way for elected officials to look at how they should be considering these types of things. It's put out by the GFOA. It's not an exciting read, but it's not a heavy read. I mean, the book isn't an inch thick. It's 3/8 of an inch thick, and I think anybody would benefit
What's the
from it.
CFOA?
GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association.
Thank you. And Ms. Frischie?
And just for the record, I attended that meeting. I didn't know that there was one. I serve on Park and Rec. I read the Courier on Monday morning for the weekly meetings. I was surprised that this went there because we were never discussed in Park and Rec a dollar amount. We looked at 4 plans and we were brainstorming. I thought it was coming back to committee, and that November meeting got canceled. So I was surprised that it went, especially when these dollar amounts and requests are so high. I do think that this needs to go back to Park and Rec.
Mr. Greeno? You had your hand up earlier. Mr. Niemeyer?
I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and I wasn't aware of the meeting. I'm not sure when that was called last minute, or...
It was sent out via email on the Thursday prior to the meeting.
Mr. Russell?
Yeah, Jim, I'd be interested, so you'll distribute the specific one, and I'd be interested in a copy of that book, please. Thank you.
Ms. Mayor?
I just wanted to address a couple of points. First of all, I agree with the auditor in that looking at our capital expenditures is not taken lightly. As you may recall, over the last year or so, we've been talking as a team. First of all, over the last 3 years, we've moved our capital plan from a 5-year plan to a 10-year plan and have been working with our departments to identify more of our longer-term spending, recognizing 2 main things. One, that we have not necessarily been making the capital investments necessary into our existing physical assets that we need to, as well as the fact that there are a number of big projects, such as this one, that have been discussed in our community for a while. So the action items that are reflected in the report, we're fine with the administration. I have reached out already to the county commissioners to get an agreement with them on the transfer of those properties. So they're working on that, as well as putting together the longer term funding of this project. And I do recognize that it is significant, potentially, as well as that it will take some dedication to figure out how we will handle it financially. So I have no issue with that. I was comfortable with moving the request forward of the $1.3 million for the design, because that's what's going to really allow us to refine the cost of the project. As was noted, the initial estimates are anywhere from $10 million to $40 million. That is a very wide range. That is because there are components in this design that we need to evaluate and determine. Are we going to have a, crazy huge bridge that is, sculpted out of marble? No, probably not. So we're probably going to be able to engineer that a little more creatively to get something that achieves what we want to achieve, which is a investment in our downtown, and a very impactful investment in our downtown that is going to be, in my opinion, a generational impact. I'm comfortable also with moving forward with this project outside of the guidelines of our strategic plan for a couple of reasons. One, we're trying to align it with the dirt movement that's being done with the Phase 2 benching, as was discussed at that meeting, as well as at the Parks and Recreation Board meetings that have been held where this has been discussed. Second, to be able to refine the scope of the project. And third, really because we needed to be able to say, how do we define the costs better in this project? I will also note that this conversation was had multiple times at the Parks and Recreation Board, and I know a number of the committee members or city council members that are not on that committee did attend, and the $10 to $40 million range was shared, and the committee said, we recognize that this is a significant investment and we're comfortable with you moving forward. That is why I felt comfortable moving that conversation forward as was done. So again, I'm supportive of saying that we need to figure out the long-term funding, 100%. Don't take that lightly. But I also think that it's prudent of us to move forward to also position us to be able to take advantage of grant programs such as the state capital budget, which will need to have a better refined plan going into 2024 to be able to apply for that. Thank you.
Mr. Hellman.
Mayor, if you would, in putting together projects like this over a longer period of time, is it not the case where many of these costs are financed through various grants at the state level or the federal level? It doesn't necessarily come out of the city's pocket, and you have to go through the design phase in order to figure out what it is that we're talking about?
It's a little bit of both. You know, it's a little bit of both. I definitely think that there are opportunities for grant funding, but I don't, we definitely are going to have local responsibility in this project.
Sure.
I think the other thing that's important to note is just because we have a game plan doesn't mean we're going to execute on the entire thing all at once. But we need to have an understanding of, okay, what does this look like? Then how can we break it down? What funding can we set aside at the local level? How can we leverage those dollars at the state and federal level to bring dollars in? And how does that then investment have a ripple effect in the community? You know, I don't think that anybody thinks that if we develop this area, which we have largely heard from the public that they support, especially during the strategic plan, is going to be a negative economic impact on the community. And I think that we would be remiss to think, to look past that as an investment that's going to be beneficial.
Mr. Baumann.
I mean, I guess that Denny kind of made my point, and I thought that perhaps that the part of the original conversation was we would not be on the hook for all of it, and perhaps maybe for theatrical purposes, the numbers that were sort of mentioned tonight, I don't think that was ever part of the conversation that we would be on the hook for all of those dollars. That's just me.
Correct. And I would, if I may, just because they give that broad range also does not mean that that's something that I would recommend to all of you. And I would also note that when we have that refined scope, again, it allows us to better leverage grant opportunities when we can say, okay, a component of this is a skate park. What grants are out there specific to a skate park? What dollars are out there from a community perspective? For example, the Community Foundation a couple years ago, I guess it's probably just a year ago, it seems like forever, but it was only a year ago, donated cherry blossom trees to be a part of this. So I think that we're able to build it, and I would note, as was shared at the Appropriations Committee, that the 30% design is really the meat and potatoes of the design phase, the engineering. That would get us through the end of this year. 2024 would then be further refining the design, and this would not be construction until the earliest 2025.
Ms. Frischie.
So this conversation has gotten a little bit off task, I think. So I think everybody is in favor of putting something at the green site or at the green location north of the river to be a park. Nobody's been against that. I do think when I'll say manipulate the words of what happened in Park and Rec, and even in the committee last week, you said that no numbers were discussed with Park and Rec. You did say that. I also requested the audio minutes from that meeting where no numbers were discussed. We discussed our ideas, our wants and needs. I believe that our Park and Rec board, if they heard the number $40 million potentially, that we would be having a more in-depth conversation. And that in-depth conversation that was gonna probably happen in November, you canceled. Or somebody canceled whether people were out of town or not. But it was the agenda item. you were asked in that meeting, how are you going to pay for it? And is this project your number one priority for your administration? And you said yes. And you did not feel currently that you're going to look for a tax increase currently. But you have a lot of things happening in our capital that we have not discussed and finalized. And I think when our auditors said there's not a rush, let's reevaluate and take 60 days because we're not going to move dirt until 2024. What is the rush, and why not have more of the meat and potato discussion with Park and Rec? Because I truly believe that we have a lot of great brains in that group that would really say, where can we reevaluate things? And maybe we don't need to be at 40 million. You said in that meeting last week that you're picturing 30 million and that you can get $10 million within the community and not through grants. So I think there's a lot of wordsmithing going on, and I think it needs to go back to Park and Rec before 1.3 million is appropriated, because once you appropriate it, we are committing to a project that could be 40 million.
Ms. Mayor.
Councilwoman Frischie, though I don't agree with all of the statements that you're making representing the comments that I've previously made, I would state that you are correct. I am not proposing a tax increase, and I can't speak to the future in its entirety. What I would focus on at this point in time is two main things that I continue to reiterate. One, to be able to move forward with a specific plan for this project, we need to work through the engineering process to be able to refine its cost and be able to leverage outside dollars. Two, I'm fully supportive of working with the auditor, as was outlined and determined in the committee report that we're discussing at this point in time.
Park and Rec.
No.
Where I'm focused.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. With the appropriations committee that's being discussed, my team has been working through the entire capital plan, refining it, and as was shared at the appropriations committee meeting, we'll be meeting with Councilman Wobser and the auditor and deputy auditor to work through that. I have no problems with that. But I think that it is ill-advised to say we can't move forward at all on a project until we know where every dollar is coming from. I think that's a disservice to the public when, again, this is a project that, one, they've fully supported, and two, that they are willing, that we need to be able to refine before we move forward on. We work through the engineering process all the time on projects to better determine how we're going to make funds.
Mr. Stashek.
Thank you, Mayor, and everyone on the discussion so far. I need to clarify 3 points, Mr. Hellman, Mr. Baumann, and the Mayor. In the meeting, I was very clear that, number one, the 10 to 40 million is not theatrics. Those are the numbers that were shared with me at that meeting, and that was the first time I ever heard them. So I'm sharing them with the public tonight because the public has the right to know. Mr. Hellman, I think you're absolutely right. Funding sources can come from other places, which is why I said in the meeting, to go along with the mayor's comments, that this body, when you are evaluating capital projects and projects of this magnitude, should receive a proposal that says what the money's going to be used for, how much money it's going to cost, taking those best practices into consideration. And I said at that meeting, this body, this committee, at a minimum, should cap the amount of money. In other words, let's say, okay, if we're going to approve this $1.3 million and we have all the information under best practices that says this is good to go, because I'm not for or against the project, I'm for good, solid business practices. It should say, at a max, this body is going to go 15 million, 20 million. Pick a number that you guys are comfortable with based on your capital needs, your capital expenditures that are required, that are necessary and important for continuing operating this city, and then move forward expending $1.3 million with design costs up to $4 million. And if the majority is 1.3, how the heck does the rest of it cost up to 4? I don't understand that. But if that's the case, cap it and move forward so that there is a complete understanding by this body as to what your max in is. And like we do the bidding for other projects, we have add-ons that we say. So we're gonna set aside $2 million for streets. If we can get the asphalt for less than $2 million, let's throw in a couple other alleys, a couple other streets, and one intersection, and you do it one at a time. So council's going to commit X dollars to this project if they're for it. And if we can get a grant for this, we'll do the grant for the skate park or a grant for this component or that component. That's what I'm advocating. That's where it's at. But I want sound business practices. And as I said in the meeting, the old joke is city councils regularly around the country, not this one, around the country will spend $1 million in 5 minutes, but argue hours over a pickup truck. We're gonna discuss this, and we're gonna discuss it thoroughly, and it's my job as your fiscal officer to make sure that happens. So thank you, and I appreciate the focus on it, and I appreciate the conversation. There are a lot of good people here, and I think we're gonna end up with something special in this community. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Baumann?
Just a quick comment and I'm done. My point was that I thought it was a tad disingenuous to kind of hang that price tag on the around the administration's neck when that was never the full the idea going forward, because there would be other funding opportunities from the get-go. That was the understanding. Yes, it was. But anyways, thank you.
Does any member who's not had any discussion upon this like to make any further comments? If not, we're going to move on. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second to accept the committee report. All those in favor of the committee report say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Say nay.
Nay.
The committee report is adopted. Legislation, we'll start with resolutions.
First reading for Resolution 5, 2023. A resolution approving the expenditures made by the Auditor's Office on the attached list of vouchers which either exceed the purchase order or were incurred without a purchase order, exceeding the statutory limits of $3,000, all in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.41D.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of Resolution 005-2023.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Discussion? Ms. Frishy?
There was 2 invoices on there. One was Treasurer of the State for EPA that didn't get paid last year, but what Campbell's Inc. and it says public buildings, what was that for? Can somebody share that $4,299 amount?
Ms. Mayer?
Campbell's does our HVAC work.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the resolution say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2023-3. An ordinance amending Chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property, referred to as Greendale Avenue Rezone, which previously was zoned R1 residential to O1 offices and institutions.
Mr. Baumann.
Move for adoption.
Second, Ms. Frishy. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Frishy?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2023-009 as amended. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into contracts for the construction of a roof replacement at Fire Station Number 2, located at 2610 North Main Street, project number 319-30200, appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Yeah, as I recall, this was, we got better pricing that was being held for 30 days, and there's kind of a need to move on that so we can take take advantage of the better pricing. That was better because of supply chain things getting better, as I recall the letter from Jeremy. So therefore, I'd move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2023-009 as amended be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
And Ms. Frishy.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2023-009 is amended.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve 2023-009.
Second, Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye after your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy. And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2023-10, an ordinance accepting the final plat as shown on the Lakota Park roadway dedication plat and declaring an emergency.
Next.
First reading for ordinance 2023-11, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-12, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-13, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-14, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a contract with Innovative Software Services Incorporated for the income tax software to be utilized by the city Findlay Income Tax Project Number 319-250-000 and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2023-15, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann.
Given that this ordinance is just us accepting assistance to firefighters grant dollars, I would move that we forgo council's statutory rules and give it a second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer. Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy. Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2023-15. Ordinance 2023-15.
Mr. Baumann.
Move for adoption ordinance number 2023-0.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Ballman.
Aye.
Ms. Frishy. Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2023-16, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and/or service safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into an agreement with Gemstech LLC for the implementation of an inventory management software system, purchase of required devices, 3-year subscription, and annual data and infrastructure to be utilized by the city of Findlay Airport and declaring an emergency.
Ms. Warnicki.
Hey, Rob, I just had a question on that. I know it talked about point of sale and inventory. What are we selling and inventorying out at the airport? I mean, I'm just curious.
A number of things, but fuel's one, oil, other miscellaneous things that pilots might need when they come in. So there's charges when they land, and so it's a point of sale that makes it convenient for customers coming in to pay right there. So it's replacing and upgrading a clunky old system. So
Ms. Frishy.
What does the monthly subscription charge give us? I mean, did we have a monthly subscription charge with the old software?
Ms. Mayor.
So I was actually going to jump up and say this. So I'm trying to remember who was a part of the conversation. So this system, one of the large benefits of it is that it actually will allow us to better advertise on national systems. So as pilots are planning their flight patterns, they're able to look at different locations, fuels, pricing, and be able to plan accordingly. So previously we would put that out on websites and on our website and a couple of others, but this makes it actually a part of this national system that will allow them to see our pricing. The monthly subscription and those items, as is probably not a surprise to anyone who's bought software recently, rather than having kind of one time, for example, like QuickBooks, instead of buying it in the box and you get your subscription and you can use it for so long, you buy a web-based subscription and then you pay a month, an annual fee to kind of always have access to it.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2023-17. An ordinance authorizing the Service Safety Director of the City of Findlay, Ohio to file an application for the Department of Homeland Security Assistance to Firefighters Grant, along with the City of Findlay's 10% match, to purchase a SCBA compressor and fill station to be utilized by the City of Findlay Fire Department and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Baumann.
Was February 10th. So I would move that council's statutory rules be suspended.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy? Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2023-17, ordinance 2023-17.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2023-017.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy? Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2023-18. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to apply for grant funds and enter into an agreement and/or related documents with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the municipal bridge program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Palmer.
Since this is just an application for the grants and there's no appropriation of money, I move that council's rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Russell. All those in favor of suspension of the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Sorry. Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy? Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2023-18. Ordinance 2023-18.
Mr. Palmer.
Move for adoption of ordinance number 2023-18.
Second, Mr. Baumann. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Ballman?
Aye.
Ms. Frishy? Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer? Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The ordinance
Mr.
is
Russell.
adopted.
Oh, Mr. Russell, I'm sorry.
Aye.
First reading for ordinance 2023-19. This is an add-on. An ordinance to approve current replacement pages to the Findlay codified ordinances and declaring an emergency.
Old business. Mr. Russell.
I'd make a motion to lift ordinance 2022-129 from the table.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of lifting, I'm sorry, ordinance 2022-129, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Frishy?
I'm not there.
This is the Mardic rezone that we had tabled since December.
Okay, thank you, yes.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Wobser,
Aye.
and Mr. Bowman.
Aye.
The ordinance is lifted from the table. Mr. Russell,
Move for adoption of ordinance 2022-129.
second Mr. Palmer, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called, those opposed nay.
Forget where I was at. Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye. Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Wobser,
Aye.
Mr. Bowman,
Aye.
and Ms. Frishy.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Any other old business? Ms. Frishy?
Going back to ordinance 9, I know we amended it, but did we vote on the amended since it wasn't a replacement, or did we vote on the non-amended one?
It was the amended, it was stated as being amended.
All right,
Any other old business? Mr. Hellman?
Yeah, can we go back for a minute and talk about this appropriations where we were talking, 40 million for the park and things like that? When these types of, appropriations committee report, excuse me, I was looking for it here. I couldn't remember which one it was. It's appropriations. When they get to us, has this not been vetted, by Parks and Rec? Have they not looked at this proposal and, concept drawings and maybe more refined drawings before you get down to detailed engineering programs? I know that you need a ballpark and so you can begin to do some design work, but how far along has this gotten before it got to us?
Ms. Mayor?
Yes, so early last year, council allowed the administration to enter into agreement with Strand and Associates, and then they also brought in Human Nature. I believe it was in May that we had an initial discussion that was kind of a brainstorming conversation with Parks and Recreation, and then we also invited a couple of other key stakeholders to be a part of that. Then it was in August that we had they presented kind of 4 concepts, what they heard from the committee, and kind of initial overviews.
And they're presented to the Park and Rec?
That was to the Parks and
'cause
Recreation
We haven't
Board.
seen that stuff yet.
Correct.
Okay,
So
good,
the
thank
Parks
you.
and Recreation Board, and I know that a number of the other council members that, the entire council was invited to that meeting. So I did
Okay.
send out emails to the group. And then I believe it was, May, August, and then there was another meeting, gosh, Denise, I should ask you, because I just sent you the email earlier today with the dates. And then there was another meeting where kind of the master plan was revealed, and I think that was in October. We shared kind of the overall master plan. We discussed, okay, is everybody good with this? What are your thoughts? From there, I said, okay, the conversation from here is then the administration will work with the consultant to then start the refining process and go to council to get appropriations. The next step from the consultant standpoint is taking the master plan that was discussed with Parks and Recreation to then through engineering. So since Appropriations Committee is the body that appropriates funds and would make recommendations, that's when the administration took it to Appropriations to discuss, here's the overall plan that has been discussed with Parks and Recreations. The next step is to work through entering into a contract to work through what you mentioned, which is that design, refining the cost, and being able to make further recommendations.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I was just confused because I didn't think council had seen any concept plans or anything leading up to a detailed plan. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yep, you're welcome.
Any other old business? Mr. Wobser?
Just a quick reminder to strategic planning. This is old business since the meeting's already been called, but the next strategic planning committee meeting is Thursday, February 9th at 4:00 p.m. Be right here in council chambers, and it will be live streamed.
Old business, Mr. Greeno?
Just a reminder that there is a water and sewer meeting tomorrow at 4:30 in the third floor conference room.
Old business, New business, Mr. Russell.
Or maybe it's old business. Planning and zoning will be meeting here on Thursday, February 9th at noon. It will be live streamed. It will be further discussion of zoning code updates. Additionally, the ad hoc committee on rules did meet at 6 o'clock today. I have forwarded a draft copy of the proposed rules with 3 basic changes. One would be a recommendation to start our meetings at 6 o'clock. 2 would be a recommendation to not meet on election days, but on the day after. And third, a recommendation to lower the time limit for speaking from one individual, so non-public, from 10 minutes to 5 minutes. And that ad hoc, that recommendation will be a committee report for on our next meeting's agenda. And once again, a copy of the proposed rules, a red line copy, has been distributed. Additionally, the ad hoc committee, outside of the rules conversation, did talk about the seating arrangement, as we said we would, taking the input of the folks, and we amongst the 4 of us thought that we should return to the pre-COVID seating, seeing as though the COVID emergency has passed. And I don't know how we Council President, how we do this, by vote, or if we
I
just...
think if you make a motion to return to that and it's seconded, we'll have a formal vote from those present, and we'll go from there.
So based on just that conversation, I would move that we would return to our pre-COVID seating arrangements with council on all council members on this side, and the administration returning to the seats over there.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Any discussion from other councils? If not, all those in favor of returning to the original seating, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? We, at our next meeting, will have that arrangement, so make a note of where your name tag is, because it's probably going to change. Any other new business? I've got a quick one. Jim, will you stand up, please? I understand today's your birthday. Is that true? Happy birthday. All right.
Happy birthday.
You can tell us how old you are if you want.
I am 58 years young.
Yeah, good for you. My shoes are about 58 years old, so congratulations. Ms. Mayor.
So just a couple of quick items. Jim, we won't take it personally that you didn't bring cake to share. We'll let it pass this time, but consider yourself reminded for next time. A couple of quick items. First of all, thank you with the grant applications. We hate asking you to suspend rules, but we really appreciate you guys getting those passed so that we can take advantage. Unfortunately, a lot of these programs, they put them out there and they're like, okay, you got to apply tomorrow. So we appreciate your flexibility in addressing those. Additionally, it's been a while, so I just wanted to give a shout out. The Safe Defend training with our local law enforcement and first responders, Findlay PD, Findlay FD, being able to work with our schools went very well. And I'm very grateful that we have such a partnership with our schools to be able to complete such a training. And it was really an honor to be able to watch them work together and make sure that our teachers and staff of Findlay City Schools are trained to, one, keep themselves safe, but also keep their students safe. So I just want to give a shout out there. Finally, I just wanted to mention, I know we have, over the last couple of months, had questions regarding the unsheltered population as well as immigrants in the community. So 2 quick items, and then I do want to have Chief Ring come up and give a couple of quick comments as he's been finalizing the 2022 annual report for the police department. So one, with the unsheltered, we did form a coalition that has been working with a number of local agencies to be able to address our homeless population. I know we saw a spike in that over the summertime, especially in the downtown area. That happened for a number of reasons. I know a couple of you have already heard me say that. One, we were, kind of cleaning up properties that they had previously been occupying. to kind of the impacts of the COVID pandemic, but 3, that we are continuing to see an increase in mental health issues and drug use. So that kind of rolls obviously into the police department. I did also want to comment though on the immigrant population because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there currently. So I would just say a couple of things. First of all, we have had immigrant populations come into our community for decades to work primarily in the summer months as farm workers. We are fortunate that our economy is doing very well in Findlay and Hancock County, and therefore we have a demand of workforce. And so we have seen an immigrant population that, to our knowledge and through all our encounters, are all here appropriately and have appropriate credentials that are working at a number of different regional manufacturers or in our communities on construction projects. So I just want to kind of put to bed that there's a lot of illegals coming to our community, because that is not the case. We have immigrant populations who are working hard and trying to make a better life for themselves. And though that they may pose some challenges in our daily lives, I think that we should be grateful that, one, they're working hard and supporting our local economy. So if folks have questions or concerns, please, as always, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I know a number of other folks have, and I have provided them the same information. And so I'm happy to answer any questions on that. At this time, if I may, yield the floor to, you have a question, and then I'll yield the floor to
Mr. Palmer.
Chief Ring.
So you're saying that we have not had any illegal immigrants dropped off in the middle of the night like the federal government has done to communities across the country?
Correct. All right, I will turn it over to Chief Ring real quick just to hit on some of the highs and lows of 2022. Again, I know we get questions a lot about our local law enforcement and crime. One thing I would remind folks is that when you look at the docket in the newspaper, this is not a ding against the newspaper. This is how it is done across the board. Those are calls out. They are not necessarily arrests or actionable cases. So please just keep that in mind, that just because you see a lot of different items doesn't necessarily mean that they panned out. So, Chief Ring.
Good evening, everybody. So yeah, we've been in the process of finishing up our annual report for 2022. Calls for service-wise, we're pretty much steady over the last 3 years. We had a slight increase of 89 calls in 2022, but that includes police, fire, EMS. The police-related calls were actually down 134 compared to last year. We are noticing, though, however, that our requests for charges, our traffic citations, and our arrests have all risen slightly. We're seeing an increase in our domestic reports, our assault reports, sex offense reports, and robbery reports. When you would see the annual report, like on the domestic front, it would show over 900 calls for domestics. And that's how many calls we've responded to that were reported to us as a domestic, or we got there and saw that they were domestic. But as the mayor mentioned, not all of those are arrested. When we run the numbers on who was charged, we're looking at about 185 cases that were prosecuted on the domestic front out of those 900 some calls. The rest of those times, it's either there was no actual physical violence. The officers respond, help de-escalate the situation, get everybody calm, and then they clear from there, and there's nothing technically criminal about it. So while we're seeing some of those increases on that front, we are seeing drops on our property crimes. Thefts, forgeries are down almost 8%. Burglary complaints were slightly up at 13%, which is the equivalent of about 15 additional reports compared to last year. Motor vehicle theft was down 7%. Property damage is down 8%. One of the main things we are still combating is that drug problem and the illegal narcotics inside of Hancock County. With the combined efforts of the Metro's task force, as well as the police officers that are doing interdictions out there on the street, trying to get drugs out of cars and houses and stuff like that, we've seen that those investigation numbers have risen about 7% compared to last year. On the seizure front, methamphetamine is our drug of choice locally. It's up. We've seized 152% more in 2022 than we did in 21. Fentanyl is also still very, very much a factor of what we're having to deal with. Those numbers are up slightly, but not as bad as the methamphetamine. But we seized 94.8 grams of fentanyl. And if you were to do the math, it's a lot of lives saved by taking that much off the street. The DEA will report that 2 milligrams can be a fatal dose. So you do the math on that, and that's enough fentanyl to kill the entire population in Findlay. So we're pulling that as much as we can, and we're buying as much of it as we can and getting through with the prosecution of everybody. Opioids and heroin are continue to fall. It's to the point where we're not seeing that too often anymore. It's the meth, and then unfortunately the fentanyl. On that front, overdoses, the fatal overdoses, we were up 3 compared to last year, but that number was sitting at 13 for 2022. Charge-wise, misdemeanors down about 9% that are being filed with the county, with the city prosecutor. Felony cases are up 11%, and even a little bit more concerning to me is that our juvenile crime is up with regards to the number of cases that were submitted for charges was up 42% compared to last year. So traffic-wise, crashes, property damage crashes are up slightly, but injury crashes are down. We didn't have any fatal crashes last year. Our number of traffic stops dropped slightly, but the number of citations rose. So they're out there getting violations and going and enforcing those actions, which it helps go to show with the the more you lower the speeds and stuff like that, the less likely you are to have the injury type crashes and those kind of things. So that's pretty much where we're at. Just chugging along and staying as steady as we can, keeping everything in front of us.
Mr. Russell.
Chief, thanks for coming here tonight and sharing that with us. I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Do you track Narcan usage by your force?
No, we do not carry Narcan. The fire and EMS carry the Narcan, and they're the ones that distribute and utilize on the scene.
So when police respond, if they believe Narcan needs to be distributed, they would.
Any overdose call we get, police, fire, and EMS are all dispatched.
Okay, great.
We get there, secure the scene so that it's safe for the medics and everybody to come in, and then they come in and do their thing.
Okay, thank you. And also, staffing has been a kind of a concern over the last couple of years.
Yeah, we are still in the process of trying to hire people.
Are you seeing better response?
Here and there. It's inconsistent. But we currently have 3 people in a background for officer spots. Our dispatch center currently is up to full strength. We've got 3 people in training in that room, but they're sitting at the right number. The patrol front, the police officer front, just hired one yesterday, or swore him in yesterday. He goes to the academy. We've got 3 that are certified that are in backgrounds, and then we'll be advertising for another test here in the next few weeks to try to fill the remaining spots.
Are we making offers that we're not?
We made 4 offers this last time around, and 3 accepted.
Are we competitive then with other regional departments?
Obviously, within Hancock County and the immediate surrounding, we're fairly competitive. If you get up around the suburbs in Toledo, stuff like that, not as much.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Frischie?
How many more do we have to get hired to get back to your full complement?
3. Yeah, 3 more on top of the 3 that we're hoping to bring in here soon. Those 3 that we're looking at currently have all been officers in other jurisdictions, and so the goal is to bring them on board, and their training period, being that they've got the previous experience and everything, hopefully goes a little bit quicker than if we were hiring somebody who didn't have any of that experience.
Any other questions? I got one quick one. One of the stats that kind of surprised me was the amount of juvenile crime, and it gone up, 42%?
Yeah.
Can you describe what kind of crime you're looking at?
Well, it's a variety of things. There was 111 cases submitted in 22, which compared to 2021, it was 78. And it's a variety of things, from this high school seen a decent uptick in the vaping type stuff. And some of that gets turned over to us. Some of that gets prosecuted, not all of it does. And then it's just a wide variety. Of just different random. I mean, we've had some domestic issues with kids. We've had some other fight issues, things like that. Nothing is too concerning. Just that number is what is. If you see a 40% jump in something, it makes you want to dive into it more.
Any other questions? Mr. Hellman?
I've just got a comment. I'm glad I don't walk in your shoes or anybody else in the police department, so thank you for what you do every day. And I've got a...
We do our best.
Well, you know, you do. I wouldn't want to do it, but thank you. And I've got just a curiosity question on the domestic disturbance things. Are a lot of those repeat type things where you're back
some
there,
are.
or is that not the case?
Some are, not a whole lot of them.
Not so much?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Keep up the good work.
We'll try. Thanks.
I don't want you to try. I want you to do it, right? You know. Any other new business? Mr. Russell?
Ready to adjourn into executive.
As long as there's no other new business, yep. Go ahead.
I would make a motion that council adjourn into executive session to discuss a potential sale of property.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of adjourning to executive session, say aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned. There will be no action to be taken after the executive session. So the public and the press, you guys can go home.